So do you think I sound any different today?
Well, you sounded different on the last podcast.
Well, it may be the same again today.
This is where we've been artificially enhanced inner vocal.
Let's be quite clear what we're talking about here. Yes, the AI tentacles have reached into the SME Growth Podcast world, and our audio is now being processed by AI. Isn't that bizarre?
I feel like Terminator.
I listened to myself back from one from last week. I thought, that's not me.
Okay. Cybernetic organism.
Yes, exactly.
Human exoskeleton.
It's going to need me anymore. Once it's learned enough.
Yeah, could train it, couldn't we? Could train.
Just do like you do with ChatGPT. Just say, talk about this, and it does in their voice. Scary.
Use a bit of, I was playing with Midjourney as well last night. It's an AI art thing.
Did you get anything good out of it?
Well, some listeners may be familiar with my earlier attempts a few months ago.
Only if they have been allowed that therapy. They were horrible.
Get the girl with the ice cream eyes. Yeah. Classic. 3 chickens in a chicken. So yeah, though, but it's actually, joking aside, I think there's almost a skill evolving around how to prompt these things.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not as trivially obvious as you think.
No. So, but good fun though.
Yeah. I was doing DALL-E, is it called?
I am DALL-E.
That's the OpenAI image generator one. Once again, it's a bit overloaded. It's very hard to actually get a response back because the servers are so busy.
Yeah.
But when you get one, it's quite amazing.
Yeah, this is all on Discord Midjourney, so you're kind of scrolling through you generate it, and then you've got to try and scroll through it to find your...
So anyway, today we will have another AI-enhanced, digitally enhanced audio. And I think it sounds quite good.
Yeah.
Interesting to play around with it, see what it does next.
Could even change the cover image on Instagram to a Midjourney art piece.
As a celebration.
I could sign them if anybody wants.
Don't go back onto your NFTs thing. Right, okay, should we do our milestone podcast?
This was a little fan. We should press the little fanfare button.
I know, we've got a button on the right over there. We could round of applause. Okay, cool. Ready? Let's do a podcast. Hello and welcome to this very special edition of the SME Growth Podcast. Special because it's our 21st, and we will explain more in a moment. But I'm Dave Parry, and with me, Rich. We've now made it through 21, well, as well as been on half an hour's time.
Yeah.
21.
Yeah, we're
staring at each other.
Fate.
So why is 21? You did explain in the last podcast, but for those unfortunate souls that haven't yet caught up with last week's episode, just tell us again why is 21 important.
Well, according to some research we did, something like 90% of podcasts don't make it past 3 episodes. So if you can get to episode number 4, you're in the top 10%. But of that 10%, only 90% of those get up to, sorry, not 90%, only 10% of those get to 21 podcasts. So by getting to your 21st podcast, which we're on the cusp of achieving it, you're in the top 1% of all
well, I think more than cuts. We're 3 minutes in. I think we've done the 24. If it stops now, we've done 21 podcasts. It just happened to finish with a very short one.
And everyone's saying, please stop now.
Yeah, that's it. Well enough. Thank you very much. Not those two waffling on again. So we thought, okay, that's a momentous occasion. And we should have had a little drink here to celebrate with that, but I've got my cup of tea.
Guinness Zero. I've got some water.
We should go back with a Guinness Zero theme. So we thought, well, let's do something to mark the fact that this is the milestone one and pay homage to the fact that we've learned a lot along the way. We've had lots of help. People were giving us advice, and we've incorporated that as we've changed. But also, lots of people who are listening to these are saying, do you know what? We want to do a podcast. That'd be great. How do we do it? So we thought we'd dedicate today to just go through some of our learning points and do it as a bit of a how-to.
Yeah.
If you wanted to do a podcast.
Well, it's good that resource then, isn't it, for pointing people to, or if you are interested in starting a podcast.
So we're not saying we're the experts, but we're one step ahead of someone who's only done 20 podcasts, maybe, and certainly several steps ahead from someone still thinking about doing it. And there's a big barrier, isn't there, to getting started. And probably true in life.
Well, for everything. I think when I first started out consulting years ago, I remember the first thing I wrote in my daybook or whatever, back in the old days, you had a little book you wrote, didn't you? There was a quote from Aristotle that said, what we must learn to do, we must learn by doing. And I think that could, that is true of a podcast. Podcast.
Just do it. JFDI.
You are not going to learn how to do it without actually doing it.
Exactly. And you learn all along. And we look back now to those early ones. And yeah, sure. What were they thinking?
And to be fair, there's still things that we want to do. We've still got ideas about how to evolve for podcasts, move it on.
Yep.
Get some new hosts.
Well, we got guest lined up,
more guests
for next week.
Yeah.
And new team member. Say hi to Pete. Pete's joined the team, and Pete comes with a wealth of video experience, videography. So look forward to that changing. What you see on the screen may change for those of you watching on Spotify or watching the shorts on YouTube or the clips on social media. So that's good. And I think the audio quality is continuing to improve. What we say, however, may not be improving in quality, but you'll be able to hear our drivel ever more clearly without the hisses and crackles and echoes and background stuff. So let's just try and I thought about a structure for today. Why don't we just go a sort of why, what, how, when, who type of list of things and try and use that as a coat hanger for our thoughts. And it's not a bad thing anyway to start with why in lots of stuff we do. Yeah. Why are we in business? Why are we here? Why is it possible about? So why do you think we started podcasts? What drove?
I think clearly it's I think one of, if not the fastest growing medium of how people consume content.
Mm-hmm.
And clearly, we all have our podcasts that we listen to, and you think, well, we've got things that to say, or just a way of we're looking for ways of how can we create more content in a way that's reasonably, I'll say easy, but that there's some kind of format around it, isn't there? Some sort of structure around it.
I think it's scalable, and for the time it takes for us to sit here and talk to each other about it in podcast format, that would have taken as much time to talk to our in-house team of writers and creatives, and so we get 2 bits of output for the price of one. And in fact, you get 200 for the price of one. By the time you scale it up, we've talked about content leveraging before, haven't we? So we get lots of video content and shorts and clips and stills and transcripts and all sorts.
So so it's a great way of creating content. And I think as well, we've always had this idea. I mean, years ago we toyed with how do we do something like a 5-minute MBA a day, wasn't it? People would always be asking for what's a good resource for just tapping into. We don't want to get an ology in it or whatever, but we just want to learn some stuff about business.
And we've learned a lot along the way. We've been doing this for nearly 20 years now, not the podcast, but advising businesses. And we've seen so many different things go well and go badly and tried different things that we wanted to distill that somehow. And like you say, in the past, we thought maybe a coffee break email or something, but actually this works a lot better. So there's a lot about sharing that knowledge, adding a bit of value to our existing clients. But I think it's probably fair to say as well, we're doing it to try and get the Wellmeadow name out there a bit wider and maybe generate a bit of interest, maybe trigger the odd inquiry or lead, a bit of lead generation from it. I can't say that we're not doing it without that in mind as well. So why not?
And it's quite enjoyable. It's quite
I think if it wasn't, we wouldn't have got to 21. I mean, let's be honest. And we do, and I think if we didn't enjoy it, and hopefully that comes across, it wouldn't be anywhere near as listenable would it really? Yeah. I think there's a bit of it as well that we talked about it for long enough. There was a bit of that, get off the fence. Are you going to do it or not?
Yeah,
we
definitely.
We had to prove that we could. I mean, how difficult can it be? You just sit and having a chat with a microphone somewhere nearby. Yeah. Then you let all the tech wizards out there to turn it into something polished. So we wanted to prove that we could do it and achieve all those other things.
I think it's great that people can. I think the beauty of a podcast is that people can listen to it at their own convenience, isn't it? And that's whatever you're doing. Driving in the car, going for a run, sitting around home, doing some work, just that kind of thing. It's not unique in that way, but I think the popularity of podcast is rising because you can have that.
Well, it stops you walking along the street, scrolling on your phone and bumping into lampposts. You can
consumption on your terms, isn't it? Really,
a time that suits you. You can break up halfway through because the phone rings, or you get to where you're going to or something.
Speed it up, double time.
Yeah, listen to.
You should have listened to us at double time.
I know, I've tried that. It's not quite chipmunks, but no. But so I suppose any other organization thinking of doing a podcast may well have any of those reasons for doing it, and maybe more besides. And one that I thought of, just as how would other maybe larger organizations benefit from this, there is an element of internal communication.
Yeah.
You get two subject matter experts of any business to talk to one another, or 3 or 4 of you, or however you do it. Then there's bound to be people in that organization that didn't know you knew that. Or maybe they knew that you knew it, but they didn't know it. Yeah. So you're starting to spread that knowledge internally. So you've got another audience there, haven't you?
And if you can capture that, I mean, the number of conversations we have with people where they start to talk about their business. I remember in a meeting the other day, someone was here and they probably gave a 5-10 minute kind of overview of their business and how it worked and things. And you think, actually, it's great to hear that, but it's not being captured anywhere. It's not being kind of, it's really in-depth sort of information about a particular industry or whatever. And that'd be actually really good to capture that on a podcast.
Yeah,
got it.
Shame you had that conversation. You think, I wish that was recorded.
Start thinking everything should be a podcast.
Yeah.
So, but it is good to, the number of conversations that happen in business between people who've got immense amounts of knowledge in their head, just almost vanish into the ether once they
just bounces off the walls.
It's a way of kind of just capturing that and just saying, right, let's just get this down whilst we've got these people around.
Yeah. So come up with your own reasons for why, and I think it's important that you're quite firm about those, because if you're going to go through this exercise, it's going to take longer to start with while you get up to speed on it and you're not quite sure whether it's what you're enjoying doing, whether you're talking to an audience out there listening or not. So be clear why, especially if you've got to persuade other people in your organization to either let you do it or to buy some equipment or whatever. You need to have a compelling reason. Okay, so that's why. I guess the next thing on my why, what, how, when, who type of thing is what you're going to talk about. You can't just sit down and talk about the weather or beer as we do all the time. There are other things that may be more relevant. So I suppose you'd start with something that you know about. And it struck me that if you have to research what you're going to talk about in the podcast, you've probably already lost the point, haven't you? You're supposed to be talking about stuff.
Yeah, nobody wants to listen to a script, do they? It's reading off things. I mean, the odd fact or figure here and there or reference. Fair enough.
That's handy. Bring it to life.
But you've kind of got to be able to talk about subjects, haven't you? You've got to.
Yeah.
And I think as well, probably a lot of business owners maybe put themselves down in that regard. There's more. You've got more to say than you. I mean, crikey, we've done 21 episodes and.
Yeah, and there's plenty more in the pipe. But you're right. I've meet so many people who don't give themselves credit for their expertise. Yeah. They presume it's common in their space and everybody knows that. Well, maybe their competitors do, but their customers won't know that. Their staff maybe won't know that. So yeah, something that you can confidently talk about and come up with some interesting bits. Pepper it with stuff you've looked up for sure to give it context and check your facts.
And I think if you can kind of, I don't know, maybe be a little bit non-linear with it, because you've almost got to try and come up with things that, you've got your core expertise that you're going to talk about, but then you can spin that off. So if you were, I don't know, an engineering firm or something, you could talk about whatever type of engineering you're doing, but maybe there's elements of, how do we recruit for engineers, or how do we, it doesn't have to be about technical subject, for example. There's all this kind of, what's it like to manage an engineering company? What's it like to run a business on your own? Or all these kind of things are actually kind of interesting topics that people are interested in, isn't it?
Well, it goes back to our episode on buyer personas and understanding where do your buyer personas live, what media do they consume, what are they interested in. You don't just have to produce content that's about what your company does. You're trying to add value to your audience, whatever that may be. So it could be, one of our buyer persona types mentions the fact that quite a lot of our clients are into fitness. So we could talk about that for either physical health or even mental health. I think mental health as well, that may be a subject in the future. Topics like imposter syndrome and burnout and being lonely at the top. That people don't talk about them enough in business, and yet that's not what we do. We don't provide advice on it, but let's surface it, and let's have a chat. So that's the sort of things you might want to talk about. Be careful though, because this is your brand you're creating. The podcast could almost be one of the most powerful pieces of your brand, more so than I know you probably, as business owners, love your logo and the way your website's done and how you express yourself in your other marketing materials. But when you speak, that that really is the person. It's not something that someone's written on their behalf, is it?
That's it. It's got to be authentic though as well, hasn't it? That's so. I mean, normally these episodes are about 3 hours long, and then we have to edit them down to half an hour. We'll keep
stuff we can.
But no, as you do have to think about what is your tone and what is your
and if you've got a personality, the business has got a personality as being a bit jokey, and their adverts or website plays a little bit on the funny side of life, then you can afford to be a bit like that in the podcast. But if you're really deadly serious, high-end law firm or something, you probably don't want to be cracking jokes every 5 seconds. Yeah. It's not what your audience are expecting. So you got to get that right.
So you got to get that right. I suppose style as well. We've kind of had a little bit of a play with different styles, maybe. We started off doing some case studies stuff, first couple of podcasts.
The first couple, if people listen back, a lot more people in the room. It's 3s and 4s, I think, were those. And it wasn't, none of them have been scripted, but there wasn't even really a bullet point list of things to talk about. At least I opened this one with, say, let's do the why, what, how, where, when type of thing.
Free form.
It was very free form. I think you ended up doing a lot more of the almost questioning the group on that one as well. You probably had a bit more of a thought in your head about the types of things you wanted to cover, and the other participants were waiting to see which way it would go. So there's certainly something to be said there for preparation, get everybody on the same page.
Yeah.
Where might this discussion go? So that was that type. Clearly lots of the ones we've done since are this style, conversation. Two blokes in a pub, just having a bit of a chat. The interview style. I think there are probably a lot more podcasts of interview style out there than this style. And I can see why, because you don't have to come up with the content. You've got to be good.
Well, if you're getting guests on as well, isn't it? Then it's sort of, you want to hear what they're saying, don't you? That's the point of having them on the show. So it's so
that's good, and we're going to be doing a few
more of those.
But we're not an interview podcast.
No.
We're here to share our expertise, peppered with other people who pop in from time to time to share their expertise. And of course, there's a benefit of that if you're thinking of doing a podcast, in that you start to address their audience as well as yours, because they're likely to share that podcast at least with people they know.
That's the goal, isn't it? One of the goals is to,
And I think that's why some people do it almost exclusively as an interview format, because they're trying to tap into other people's audiences all the time. I think we've got quite a strong view that a very strong part of the value for us is that we're giving something to our clients, to our existing people. We're not always just trying to hunt down other people. We're not sponsored, we don't have adverts and all that because
yet.
Well, we're kind of sponsoring ourselves. We're doing it for us, aren't we?
Yeah, sponsored by Wellmeadow.
Sponsored by us.
Yes.
I think you've got to work out as well what you're going to call it. It's got to meet with what you're going to talk about and your brand, and is it an interview thing? Is it a conversation? So coming up with something that makes sense, that fits with the rest of what your marketing is all about. So we're called the SME Growth Podcast. And if you Google that, we come number 1.
Yeah.
So that's quite handy, if you're trying to share it with people, rather than saying you have to go to Spotify and look up Wellmeadow and blah, blah, blah. Just Google.
Yeah, and you may not want it. I'm trying to think why we decided not to call it the Wellmeadow Podcast. I think it's...
Yeah, I think we're trying to do what it says on the tin. We're not telling you about Wellmeadow. We're telling you about how to grow your SME.
Yeah.
So that's what it is.
So
that's what you're going to talk about, what you're going to call it, all that type of thing. Who are going to be the speakers? Who's behind the microphone, and then who's behind the control desk, and there's lots of people involved in this. Do you have the same people every week? Do you have interviewees? So we've gone for this style, and it's settled down to the two of us, and I think that's working well, because you settle into a way of working together, don't you? But you don't have to. You could have different people every week doing it.
Yeah, I'd say it's become quite familiar and natural to do it, isn't it? Like if you'd have said 6 months ago we're going to do a podcast,
just sit and talk for half an hour,
they'd be a bit like, what we're going to do, and how are the cameras and lights, what's going to happen? Not quite like that, but you get what I mean. Whereas now it's right, okay, we're doing a podcast today, just get on and do it. And it's become,
what should we talk about?
Second nature. It's not sort of second nature, which I think is an encouragement for people to say that if the first couple are going to be a bit bumpy, right?
Yeah, that's okay.
But it doesn't matter, because no one probably going to listen to them anyway.
Well, imagine if you find a podcast now and it's on episode, blah, de blah. You don't think, I found that one, and now I'm going to go back to number 1 and listen to them all the way through from the beginning. It's not like watching a series on the telly, is it, where you need the plot?
But I reckon if you go to any podcast that's reasonable in number of episode size, and you go back to their first couple of podcasts, the vast majority of them
bit scratchy.
sound different, bit scratchy. It does take a while to find your feet.
But that's a good tip for people thinking of doing this. Go and find someone established. Go and listen to episode 1 and take some confidence from the fact that they've come on a long way since then, and so will you.
Yeah.
So I think it works well. I think choosing the people, you've got to get that balance between the people in your organisation that know enough to talk about, but also you don't mind listening to.
Yeah.
Now, I think we probably all know people that are very expert on stuff, but they drone a bit, or perhaps, go off in tangents in ways that are less interesting. And you've got other people who are absolutely brilliant on a microphone. Yeah. And they're really comedic and great fun to just be with anyway, but they're maybe not your subject matter experts.
Yeah.
So maybe get
the
mix
balance
them together or whatever, get the balance.
Yeah.
And accept that not everybody wants to do this, but there is a little bit where if you're maybe pushed a little bit to give it a go, you find you don't mind it after all. A bit like we talked in a previous one about public speaking. Everybody says that I can't do public speaking or I'm frightened of public speaking. Just give it a go and you find that you suddenly get good at it.
Exactly. You're not going to learn if you don't do it, do you? It's
And then how many people? This is working well with 2. I think it's easier to bounce the conversation backwards and forwards between 2 people. If you have a guest, maybe it's 2 plus the guest. You could do 1 interviewer and a guest. You could do that. The 4-way conversations, I think, were harder to manage. You probably need a lot more practice there to bounce conversations 4 ways, make sure everybody gets a turn.
Yeah, I think maybe as well, just how long your podcast is going to be. So if you're going for half an hour, 4 people is quite, it's probably, it's a bit of a stretch to get everyone to have a fair hearing.
Said something.
Whereas maybe if you're a longer form, you could have people in, but then you get into the kind of, okay, what does the room layout look like? It gets harder to place cameras as well. And
so you don't see the camera in the shot.
Camera in the shot, and then you've got 4 people and you want a close-up shot on everybody. You've got to have 4 cameras. So then there's all these sorts of things that you don't really think about at the start until you start doing it, and then you realise, actually, we probably do need to, think about this.
We have to start watching telly a bit then and think, how do they do panel discussions? They're not all around a table, are they?
No.
Because you'd see the cameras behind us. So you have to be in a bit of a row, which is actually quite unnatural to talk to people who are sat alongside you.
Yeah.
You normally talk across.
So
you've got to think about all that type of thing. So that's getting it captured, recording the podcast itself, but then afterwards there's amount of time that's needed to edit it. We talked about processing the audio.
Yeah.
If you're doing video as well, you've got to edit that into the shorts and then cascade it across all the various platforms to make sure that someone actually finds it. So who do you get to do that? Well, I think that may be one of the major barriers as to why companies haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
Because even if you could find, maybe you've got a really bubbly MD or marketing person or salesperson or whomever, and they are prepared to sit behind maybe even an iPhone just to chat about the subject for half an hour, the thought of what happens next puts people off.
Yes, there is, I'd say, probably a reasonable amount of work that goes into processing all of this footage. And
I think if you're going to do it well.
And if you're going to do it, and then that's back again to your brand, isn't it? How do you want this to come across? So, you could do this with an iPhone and just chuck the whole thing up.
You could put it raw, no processing at all. That would take you half an hour.
So...
But to do it, I think the way we do it probably takes 1.5, 2 days or so of somebody's time and that's including everything. That's editing, shorts, the clips that go on LinkedIn are different. And even though you can use software to cascade it across all the podcast platforms, that won't include Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube.
Yeah.
You got to do those manually. Your own website.
Yeah, and you've got different formats for all those different platforms. So
different shaped images,
all that. So it's you need a bit of an engine behind it, really, to make it really go.
So and especially if you're doing it relatively regularly, and we'll come on to that in a moment, you've got to therefore think, what's this going to cost either internally, or if we were to pay someone like Wellmeadow to do that bit for us, what's that going to cost? And where's the trade-off? Is it worth it? Going back to the why. Are you sufficiently driven that you want to do this, or are you only really bothered if it's effectively free?
I think as well there's an element where the more professional the output you want, the more technical it gets as well, isn't it? So we're we were talking about equipment in a bit, but it's reasonably high-end kit. It's your internet specialist software to, into technical things like what's the frame rate? What was the one we filmed the other day? That's some ridiculous frame rates.
Oh yeah, We're doing great.
In absolutely crisp.
We could have slowed that down to intent, that speed, slow motion, and still had it smooth as anything.
Yeah. So there's all those sorts of technical things that you've almost got to have a handle on.
The SD card, didn't it? Yeah.
So
okay, so that's the who. You need the internal, the talent, as you might call them, and you need the post-production people, the techies, and all the wizards out there. Okay, so we've done why, what, who, when, and I thought under when we could talk about frequency. How often should we do them? Maybe which time of day you do them, but what about frequency? We do them weekly.
I mean, obviously some people do a daily podcast, but I think if you're at that end of the spectrum, it's probably a job.
Yeah, it would have to be. Yeah,
it would have to be, because they're
quite a team and all that.
I think fortnightly, maybe at a push.
I think about that. I think that's too much for podcast.
I think it's too much. Yeah, I think weekly is probably.
Monthly is definitely too much. You've forgotten. What did they say last time? I can't remember. I've forgotten the name of that podcast.
I think with a podcast, I think what we found is that you've got to get the traction going on it.
Yeah.
At the start, you're going to have nobody listening to you.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to build enough of a momentum.
Maybe there's nobody listening to us now. Just us two.
Into the void. So you've got to get that traction and momentum going. And I think as much, in terms of what people want to hear, in terms of, this is a weekly podcast or whatever, just the discipline of our own diaries, carving out the space to say, no, we've got to get a podcast out this week.
Well, to the point we've come in 8 o'clock in the evenings to do them. Last week we were at 7:30 in the morning.
Yesterday, 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Because I think it's the discipline. You've got to have the discipline to get them out, because otherwise you miss a week, you miss 2 weeks, all of a sudden the momentum's gone.
Yeah. It's a bit like the diet will start tomorrow. You've got to absolutely be committed to do it. So I think weekly, plus the fact, if you say we're going to do a monthly one, then go back to the why. If you only got 12 things a year you want to talk about, is that all? Is that the sum total of your expertise you want to share? It looks a bit lame, doesn't it? Really.
I mean, really, I think as well. One of the reasons for, maybe not a reason, but one of the offshoots of a podcast you see a lot of times is a community, isn't it? So I'm not saying that we've got a SME Growth Podcast community, but who knows what might happen? Do some webinars, do some events or something. Bit of merch, whatever,
of the live version
or whatever. But it is about, so back to the buyer persona, certain types of people listen to certain types of podcasts because they're into certain things. So you've got that community there. Well, in any community, if you were only turning up once a month or 10 times a year or something, it's not really a community.
Well, it just takes a lot longer for that to establish
or something. But whereas I think a weekly thing gives you enough to kind of
it. Yeah. No, I'd agree. And in terms of, it's sort of not quite when, but the time element, how long do you think a podcast should be? Ours are about half an hour. For those listening, and we're just coming up to the half-hour mark, please be aware we are doing a slightly longer version today because we've got a lot we want to share with you. But normally they're about half an hour. You could do a 15-minute sort of bite-sized version, couldn't you? If your audience were particularly busy and maybe they all wanted to just listen to what you've got to say.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit short though, that doesn't it?
A bit short. I mean, I don't know. I think it depends on, most of the podcasts that I listen to tend to be an hour and a half long or something like that.
Yeah. But that's podcast listening, isn't it? It's like watching a film type length. If you've got to understand, I suppose, where are your people going to be listening? If lots of them are driving to work or on the train with headphones on, you've got that amount of time. If they're dog walking, you've got that amount of time. I was talking to Alan outside this morning. He's a big podcast listener, and he would rather sit and listening to podcasts rather than watch the telly. So he'll just sit and put the headphones on and listen to an hour and a half.
Try and do that. Shut my eyes. Think I'll listen to this podcast with my eyes closed.
All right. How long did it take till you fall asleep?
About 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It's all going in there, isn't it? So I think.
Oh, isn't it? Sleep.
Subliminal.
But bear in mind, people are going to be listening in the car, on the dog walk, so they're not always going to have access to a screen, so they won't be necessarily watching the video. The video's there to promote it, maybe in that case, rather than... So don't show things or talk about things that you need to see for them to make sense.
Yeah, that was one of the earlier podcasts. We were doing case studies and throwing things up on the screen and
look at this,
and it actually made the editing a lot more complicated, to be honest. Yeah, because you've got screens in screens and all sorts of things going on. So
yeah. Okay, so that's when, some time stuff. Where? I thought about where do you physically record it, and then where do you push it out? Where's the channels that it goes out? And physically recording it, you need a room that's suitable for the job, don't you?
Yep.
And we've turned our meeting room into a dual purpose room that we can still have meetings in, but we've put some acoustic paneling on the wall, and we've got lighting, and we've got the camera set up. So it's a pretty good space.
Yep.
So that's where, but not everybody will have that. If you're going to set up a room every time you need to do a podcast, that's going to give you a little bit more of a barrier to let's not do it this week because the room's busy for something else.
Yeah. So I think as well, again, the room, like what do you want to say with the room? So at the moment, ours is, I mean, I suppose we're on that journey of turning it more into a podcast room rather than a meeting room.
You did promise me a neon sign on that wall behind you saying the SME Growth Podcast.
So yeah, there's plans underway to, stay tuned,
see what we do with
it.
Yeah, more plants maybe.
Plants.
Sounds of crickets in the background.
Jungle theme.
Yeah. So that's where you record it. It's got to be acoustically right and video right, and you've got to be comfortable in it. Yeah, practical.
And then where do you host it?
Where do you put it out? So the big secret is that there is a piece of software. It's actually owned by Spotify, and it used to be called Anchor.fm, and I think they just rebranded it because it's Spotify's own thing, and then they call it Spotify for Podcasters or something like that.
Yeah.
But if you search for Anchor FM, that's what it always was, and that's what people will know it as. So because it's owned by Spotify, it pushes it to that, including the video. And I think I'm right in saying that's the only platform that has video natively in it amongst the podcast platforms. Am I right?
Could well be. Apple doesn't, does it?
Don't think I've never seen a video on Apple. I'm not really plugged into some of the other platforms. But if you do Anchor.fm, that goes to Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Google Podcasts, Castbox, Pocket Casts, and Stitcher, as well as an RSS feed. So in one hit, you get all of that lots. As I say, I think the only one of those that does video is the Spotify one, but it's there if people want it.
Yep.
Then where else should you put it out? Well, YouTube works quite well for us.
Yeah, put shorts out on YouTube and the full-length episode.
Yeah, we're getting close to 1,000 views of the shorts, some of the shorts. So that's good. Similarly with LinkedIn, people will say they've seen your video when what they mean is they've been scrolling up the LinkedIn feed and there's the 60-second stitched together sound bites, highlights reel. And that's, it's good enough to get the gist.
Yeah.
And to know that you're doing it.
Yep.
So that's good.
Instagram, Facebook, Reels we should look at as well.
Yeah.
We haven't done that yet, but that's another big thing taking off. So, and we host them all on our website as well. So
we do, yeah. I noticed some people do the sort of .tv domain extension to almost have, company name .tv. We've just got another blog. We've got 2 blogs on our website, one for our real blog and one for the podcasts. And then you can host the video on there yourself, which is good in some ways because you've captured people into your ecosystem.
Yeah.
And if you can then tempt them off to go and maybe look at some of the material you have been talking about, you might then get somebody to fill a form in and have an interaction with them. You know who they are. The great thing from the listener's point of view about podcasts is you don't have to reveal who you are to the podcast people.
Yeah.
Obviously, your platform will know who you are, but in case you were ever wondering, we can't tell. So you
can't tell.
Don't know who you are, which is okay. If people are interested in contacting us, they will.
Well, and that's where I think back to the point I was making about community, isn't it? A lot of podcasts will either have a what do they call it, like a Patreon or something like that.
Yeah.
To support the podcast, but that way you get to, members perks and all that type of stuff.
We should set up a Discord server. On how many of our listeners will find their way to that? Probably not the right demographic. But anyway, yes, they are all on the website. So you need to pump it out there. It's got to be out there somewhere, isn't it? The other thing that I found quite useful is on our email footer. We put a little banner out to point people to it, make it easy to provide some links there.
We need to change the image on that though.
My image is dreadful.
I look like a Care Bear.
But has anybody told you look like a Care Bear anyway? I'm just cuddly guys.
It's very cuddly, festively plump.
It was digitally enhanced. We asked an AI image to say, turn this picture of Richard into a Care Bear. So that's where. So what remains of this podcast, which could be the next half an hour if we're not careful, is how do you do it then? What were our learning points? What would we point you to? So I just thought we've got to talk about the content first, I think, because before you've even bothered about recording it, there are a few tips and tricks that we've learnt to help us come up with some content. Yeah. So I think that you're quite good at coming up with subject ideas. So I think you need someone in the organisation to be that. What about one on this? What about one on that? And I would say the instinct should always be, yes, now let's do it, rather than, no, that will be difficult because.
Yeah.
Because if you want to try and shoot every idea down, you will.
Yeah.
Whereas if you want to say, well, there's a grain of something in there we could definitely make a podcast out of, now let's find it and do it, then you've got a podcast. And even the ones we've not been quite so sure about have all been interesting, I think.
Yeah, I think once you, like you say, you start with that idea and almost like a mind map, really. You come up, what would you say about that? And then that triggers another thought and triggers another thought. And before you know it, you've got half an hour of something you can talk about, and that's a podcast.
So that's the idea. And then in terms of how you prepare those participating, you could go to a script, and I think we've never done that, and I can't imagine how long it would take to write one. How many words are there in half an hour's worth of chat? A lot. And you can't really write the way you speak, can you? It would be odd.
No.
Take your hat off.
And also, I think as well, the whole thing would have to be scripted then, and you'd end up, it's almost like a play. It's a game, isn't it? Rather than
we'd have to rehearse it and stuff, wouldn't you? So anyway, don't script it. It'd take you too long to do it, and it probably would come across as wooden.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So it's not scripting. But also the other end of the spectrum, just turn up and have a chat. A bit like our early ones. Very, very hard to do, I think. Maybe not if you're on your...
I think if you had... I think you could do it, but there's a danger then that it goes off topic or just runs into the sand a little bit.
Yeah, could do.
I think the problem is once you are filming, there is that thing that once you're in front of a camera, which I suppose is another thing to think about. You get used to being in front of the camera.
Ignore the camera.
Everyone else might not, but you do. But there is that all of a sudden, what am I going to say next that you wouldn't have if the cameras weren't there? So
I think we need something in between, especially if you're trying to manage the balance of conversation. You don't want someone dominating the microphone.
Yeah.
Like I do. Keep throwing it over to you. And you throw it back in.
Yeah.
So the secret, I think, I'll put it up for those of you who are watching on Spotify. We have a bit of paper with nothing more than some bullet points on it, really. And you can tell when the other person is either expanding on the bullet point you're already on, or they're moving on to the next bullet pointy thing.
Yeah. I think it's very helpful to have, because like you say, when the other person is, assuming there's two people doing it, that you know what they're talking about. You can see what's coming next. And I suppose what you don't see you won't see it obviously if you're listening. But if you are watching,
even on the video,
on video, because of the way it's edited, that we're focusing on the person who's kind of doing the speaking.
You never see us
not speaking, is that?
You never see us both at the same time, do you? We might not.
Yeah, we
might be the same person.
It's just
wearing makeup.
So that's.
So I know that you're now going to talk about how you bring in a guest to the conversation. If you're doing a podcast with a guest.
If we're doing a guest with the conversation. So we try and prep them a little bit. A lot of people don't want to come on a podcast just as a kind of, I'll turn up and have a go.
We tried that. It's people who run a mile.
And that's fair enough, because I probably wouldn't want to either. You want to know what people are going to say. You want to have a rough idea of what you're going to be expected to talk about.
Yeah.
So, we would normally just prepare one of these bullet point lists and say, right, this is the type of thing we want to talk about, and just bring you into the conversation.
But we're both used to reading it while talking, knowing that the camera will be on the other person, so you don't keep getting this, looking down at the list type thing. The guests don't do that, do they? They're focusing so much on being part of the conversation and living in the moment that they don't want that distraction. I think you get used to it.
You get used to it, and so I think then that's your job as the host then, to try and steer. It's easier for you to then steer them. Just let them flow with what they want. That's why they're there, right? Is to talk about their expertise, and your job is to then try and steer the conversation according to the outline that you've got.
So that's the sort of body of the talking stuff, but there's an intro and an outro in every podcast. What do you do at the beginning? What do you do at the end? And we did have a few discussions about that. We did try to script those in the early days, but that was kind of a waste of time. Really. You just talk it more naturally. But I think you've still got to have a view about what type of things do you want to include.
Yeah, so I think the intro bit, what the approach we've gone for is, obviously we're talking about a particular subject in the main body of the podcast, but that can be very subject focused. Obviously, we try and bring a little bit of personality through that, but I think the intro bit is more about, let's try and bring a little bit more personality into the podcast. Let's try and just, rather than jump straight in, just people who are listening that might not know us can get to know us a little bit, hear about some of the other stuff that we've been up to, maybe even get some ideas out of it. We're talking about Mid-Journey earlier, or if you've not heard of that, go and have a go. You can have 25 images for free. So, those sorts of things, just
You can go a bit off topic.
You can go a bit off topic.
And maybe current affairs or just whatever. And then the outro, I think the big question there is, are you trying to make this salesy? Are you going to promote whatever your business does or what it is, or get people to go places? Or are you just saying, thanks for listening, please share it a bit? Are you going to point people to bits of content on your website and be sort of overt about that, which may be helpful if you said stuff that does relate to it? Or is it come across as a bit forced, oh, please come and look at our website? Well, why? I've listened to what I want to listen to. That's me. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, particularly as well, again, because you're not, you're probably not watching it online in front of a laptop. You're in the car or something. You can't
act upon it anyway.
So
no, exactly. I think the same problem with if you ask people, as we do, please share this podcast. There's no harm in asking people, but they're probably not in a place and a time where that's very convenient for them to do it necessarily. So maybe they'll just do it naturally anyway. If they hear a good podcast, they'll tell their friends. If they weren't, they're not going to. Just you asking them to do it probably is.
It's very interesting if you think about it. How many podcasts have you shared with someone? Just the sort of stuff you listen to?
Yeah. Well, only a few.
There's only one or two that I can think of the thousands of podcasts that I probably listen to. I might tell someone to listen to, go and listen to that.
Yeah, and then they may do that. And I've certainly picked up some good podcast tips from others, but there's so many out there. It's a bit like when you recommend someone a good book, you almost feel guilty. Yeah. That's another book on my list of books I haven't read, a bit like podcasts I haven't listened to.
Yeah.
But good ones are worth sharing, but I think they'll probably get shared anyway. I'll still probably carry on asking people to share podcast at the end, but they're either going to or they're not, probably, quite frankly. Okay, so that's all the what to say stuff. Let's talk a bit about, in terms of our how, some of the equipment decisions that you make. I think the biggest one is, do you do video?
Yeah.
Because you've got to do audio, right? That's I'm going to do one without the audio.
Very far otherwise.
Yeah, you might call that a blog, I suppose.
Yeah.
A podcast without the audio. So you've got to do the audio. The only question is, do you do the video as well?
Right.
And we've said earlier, it's only really Spotify or YouTube or your own website where people can actually watch you doing it. So is it worth it? I think so, for the promotion.
Yeah. I think otherwise it's very hard to get the message out. Yeah. I think it's a great way of being able to leverage your content. We talked about that another episode of the podcast. But you're having the conversation anyway. So if you can get the cameras in there, why not capture it?
So let's talk about equipment. Now, assume that some people will want to do audio only because it's cheaper and easier. Let's talk about audio first.
Yeah.
So the kit we've got these microphones. These are podcaster microphones from Rode, got Rode branding all over them. There's some booms that hold them off the desk so you don't pick up any drumming fingers or that type of thing. You can get C stands as well, or you can get desk mounted ones. And then over there, just out of shot, if you're watching on the thing, is a mixing desk. Now it's called a Rode Podcaster Pro. It's about £500 and it's got 4 channels on it, plus a load of pre-canned sounds and all sorts of processing to get the audio quality right.
Yep.
So if you're talking about a bit of a setup here, you've got your £500 for your mixing desk. These microphones are £100 each. The booms are actually more expensive, about £125 each, and we've got 4 of these.
Yep.
So if you just went for 2 microphones, 2 booms, and the mixing desk, you're talking about £1,000-ish.
Yeah, probably.
Maybe 1,500 if you go for another 2 and some different ways of hanging the microphones.
Yep.
But so if you're a business talking about doing something for marketing, that I think is quite cheap.
Yeah.
You can get yourself up and running with an audio-only podcast pretty quickly for the sake of £1,000, £1,500.
Yep.
But if you really buy into the video bit, which we talked about, then you're going up quite a step more, aren't you?
So, I mean, if you can... How long's a piece of string when you come to what you actually want to film with? You could do it with an iPhone, but it's going to look pretty...
Well, it's interesting. I was asking Pete, our video guy, this, and I was doing some research on YouTube about it. I wanted to see a side-by-side.
Yeah.
So we don't use iPhones. We use a brand of cinematic camera called Blackmagic, which in those circles is very well known. It's probably one of the top-end brands for that type of thing. So it's called a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema, 4K cameras. In fact, for those of you watching, I'm just going to show Rich now in context because we can see behind the scenes. If we go Carry, I'll pan the camera out, and you can see there's a camera there, and there's some lighting, and there's our studio setup. There we go. That's our probably won't have been able to hear much of that as I moved away from the microphone, but I just showed a little bit of the setup in the room. So we've got those cameras. Now, they're quite expensive cameras, about £1,000 each for the body, plus a bit for the lens.
Plus the lenses.
£400 or £500 for a lens, or more for zoom lenses.
Yeah, and then by the time you've attached all the other stuff on it, tripod and cages to hang stuff off and all the other bits, you're probably £2,000, maybe a little bit more per camera.
So if you're going to have 2 people in the podcast, you're going to need 2, and you might want 3 or 4 if you've got more people, or you want a room shot where everybody's in it. So you're talking probably more like £5,000-6,000 when audio plus cameras.
Yeah.
If you want to go down that route.
Yep.
And then you might want basic things like tripods to put the cameras on, and lighting rigs, and that sort of thing. So,
yeah.
If you had a budget for 10,000, that would cover it, but you don't need to spend all of that.
Yeah. So it's, I think then you're into as well, like, if you think we spent money on this room to make it acoustically.
Yes, we have acoustic wall behind Richard over there. We've got tiles on the ceiling that you can't see, which are made of foam to absorb the echoes and so on. So
there is an investment.
It's probably about £10,000 would for safety cover it for the kit, for the assuming you're going video.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about the iPhone bit though, because people will be tempted to go that route, and there's nothing out and out wrong with that.
No,
iPhones have got very good cameras on these days. Bear in mind they cost £1,100 each as well though for the latest iPhone. Now you may already have one, but they're not free. It's just that you may already have them.
Well, I think in a business context as well, you probably don't want to be just using people's personal iPhones, or you probably want some dedicated kit as well, don't you?
Well, ideally, and that's what we do.
You don't want is a phone call in the middle of filming.
That would be a bit embarrassing. Well, stop the podcast.
Stop the podcast. It's so
someone's ringing to sell me some electricity supply or whatever they ring for.
And I think as well, it does make it feel a bit more, a bit more intentional if you've got proper kit and it feels like a podcast. And I think this is something we've seen it over the last 15 or so years, or 10 years or so, with the iPhone coming out, changing the way that design looks and changing the way that we're all like, if you read the old books like Lean Startup and you look at an MVP, what could you do when you could, 5 cents a click on Google, who's getting that nowadays?
Yeah.
Ropey website that you could throw out. You just can't do that anymore because people have been conditioned to high quality content regardless of what stage you are in your business life cycle.
Yeah.
So there is an element of saying, well, actually, by investing in the kit,
shows intent.
It shows intent.
And if you have a guest come in and you've got an iPhone on a dodgy tripod, it's perhaps not quite got the same. You're not going to get the same amount out of them in the same.
That's it, exactly. Yeah.
And I think don't ignore the fact that the tech is there for a reason. It's not just because it looks better. The technical difference really between the iPhone and a proper camera like these is probably twofold. One is you've got almost complete control over these cameras.
Yep.
Not only can you change the frame rate, the shutter angle, as they call it, video shutter speed, if you like, the ISO settings, the white balance and all of that, but it puts out a file which is in its raw form, which you can then do anything with.
Yeah.
So you've got complete control over what the final image looks like, and it's very high quality, so you can zoom in and crop in and all sort of stuff. iPhone does lots of clever stuff, but with the software, and you've got less control over it. You can't do so much. But the other main thing with iPhone versus these cameras is what they call the dynamic range. So the difference between the black and the white. So if you take, there's a great, if you go on YouTube and just look for a side-by-side comparison of the iPhone, say 14, and one of these Blackmagic 4K cameras. They've got the same tripod looking at exactly the same scene, and he plays it with the swiper across, so you can see what it looks like.
Yeah.
And the depths of the blacks and the brightness of the whites on the proper Blackmagic camera is phenomenal. When you suddenly compare it, if you look at an iPhone footage on its own, you don't notice what you're missing.
Yeah.
But then when you compare it to a proper videoed image, it is quite different. So, like you say, it's probably more about what you feel like doing it than you'll notice the video difference, but it will definitely be there. You get more control. That's that.
Yeah, software. There's all sorts of other hardware you can buy around. We've done some, not a live stream podcast, but we've done live stream events where there's more kit that you can buy to live stream everything. It can.
Video mixing desks, we've got one of those over there.
Mixing, editing, tools, all that, and then.
Oh, don't forget as well, for the cameras, you're going to need a very high-speed SD card to capture it all. You can't just rely on your normal digital camera card.
And you need also probably something like a Mac Studio to actually process it.
Oh, the computers to process it, sure. If you try and do this on a laptop.
Hang on a minute. How much have we spent?
When you add it up.
How much have we spent on this podcast?
Well, you're right. We've got a few Mac Studios out there, and they're a few £1,000s each. You need the processing power.
Yeah.
Because these large file sizes will just grind it.
This is not like, an MP4 file from your iPhone. This is a serious amount of data.
Yeah, is it a couple of terabytes or something coming out of this podcast?
This one will be a lot, yeah.
So that you've got to handle a couple of terabytes worth of data. That's some mean stuff. And as I say, even getting it onto the SD card, you've got to have something like a 512 a second.
Yeah, that can handle the
bitrate thing to go on there. So yeah, not to be sniffed at, but still, your 10 grand maybe will just get you that studio if you're only going for a 2 microphone, 2 camera setup.
Yeah, and once you've got it, haven't you?
Yeah,
so then
exactly.
You can use it.
Now the software, not necessarily. You don't necessarily have to spend a lot on the software. With these cameras, you get software included.
With that,
the DaVinci Resolve software comes with Blackmagic. You can use Adobe Premiere Pro.
Yep.
So that's part of the cloud suite that we've got. £75 a month.
Yep.
And that does some of your audio stuff as well, because you probably want either Audition, which is the Adobe version of the editing software, or you could do that on the free DaVinci Resolve one, or you could use GarageBand if you want.
Adobe's got the free AI tool at the moment as well.
Yeah, that's the one that we're using today to
beautiful
make us sound all Barry White. And then in terms of, we're talking about equipment, but under the how is also the people.
Yeah.
How do they do it? And we're not going to try and dress this up as saying you've got to be, degree qualified or have had an apprenticeship at the BBC to better do it. These bits of software are designed for normal humans to use them, but don't think it's just out the box.
No.
Easy to do. It takes some practice, which is why your first few might be a bit scratchy.
Yeah.
But then they'll put you off. So if you've got people internally that want to learn that and get better at it, then they'll improve.
Yeah.
Clearly, beholden for us to say that's what we do as well. So even where our clients may do podcasts, they can still record it themselves, send us the files, and then we can do all the clever bits afterwards.
The processing, make it look good.
Yeah. So that's a bit of the how. So I just thought, sort of finish up.
Maybe a little tip as well.
Oh, go on.
The little clap that we do at the start, don't we?
Oh, yes. That's
at the start of every podcast, we do a little clap, which you'll probably never hear.
No, it's always edited out.
But
we have to say 1, 2, 3 and clap at the same time as each other. And that's to synchronize the audio and the video, which I suppose we could get a clapperboard. But a clapperboard.
We'll put all the claps together one day in one big edit. But no, it's just those little tips like that, isn't it, that makes it, you don't want your audio off sync with your video, because that becomes a little bit...
Looks a bit silly.
Or just a bit hard to watch.
Okay, so there's probably some more tips in there as well. After we've done our 100th, we'll come back and do a few more tips. What about main learning points then? What do you think that, having done what we've done, how would you help somebody else accelerate the learning journey, the learning curve?
Well, I've talked about the kit, so you're going to have to make a choice about investing in the kit.
Yep.
So that's
choose the right stuff from the beginning. That's just a bold decision.
Start with the end in mind. I think if you thought that you weren't going to do more than, 20, 40, 50 podcasts, kind of why you're doing it anyway.
Do you know what as well? I think if you spent 10 grand on it, you're going to be more motivated to keep them going.
Yeah.
Do you want either your own conscience or your boss breathing down your neck to say, why did we spend 10,000 again? We've only done 3 podcasts, like that 90% of people would do. Other bits we've learned as well in here, remember to turn the air conditioning off. That's got an annoying high frequency noise, which you can filter out, but it's a lot easier if it's not there to start with.
So lighting.
Lighting. Now we've got LED lights in here, and I don't know if everybody realizes it, but LED lights flicker very fast. That's how they work. And the cameras can pick that up.
Yeah.
And if the frame rate of the camera isn't different to the flicker rate of the LED lights, then you get this really horrible effect.
So you've got equipment you need to get right. You've got the setting that you need to get right as well, isn't it? In terms of both the technical aspects of acoustics, but also what's your look and feel. And
people maybe don't realize these plants that we have between us are actually real plants. They're not plastic plants, but that means that they come in here for the occasion. They wouldn't live in here because there's no light, so they go out and live by the window, but we bring them in to dress the room, as they say.
And that, if we're going to do some work on that, I think in the not too distant future, just now that we're a bit more established, and again, it's one of those things that you don't have to necessarily have it all done on day one. You know, I think there is something to be said for watching the podcast evolve. And
well, even our camera positions we've changed it. They used to be at that end of the table and they could see the door in the background, and we thought we'd change that around.
So and you may not, you know, not many people are probably going to have a perfect podcasting space. This room, if you were starting with a blank sheet of paper, you would not choose this room as a podcasting room.
No.
Because we've got doors, we've got glass window, we've got plastered walls, all this type of thing. But you've got to, you know, make do with what you've got, and then there are things you can do to adapt it. So
then I think the other learning point as well is the shorts have really lifted our game.
Yeah.
And being able to promote the podcast with these small sound bites. But you've got to remember when you're talking then that someone's got to try and cut out small chunks of what you've just said to be able to put into those. So it's helpful not to talk over each other too much, and maybe to have the odd pause between things to say.
That's probably something now that's coming a lot more natural, isn't it? That when the other person's, I was terrible. I used to always get told off when we were doing interviews or podcasts for doing like active listening. And the kind of,
I just did it
like that there. Just like, yes, can you stop doing that?
Yeah.
Just be quiet. The other thing as well that we really do need to get, and you'll see this if you're watching, these swivelly chairs.
I was just about to say swivelly chairs.
You know, we're constantly being told off by Verity for moving around.
Yeah.
And, you know, it'd be nice to have maybe like a time lapse, and you probably just see us like...
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, the distance from your mouth to the microphone is really critical, and the levels going up and down all over the place as you're swinging around.
Yeah.
And I'm realizing I made a big mistake early going over that camera because I moved a metre away from the microphone. It'll just be dead air. There you go. That'll be in the next.
You live and learn, don't you? We're still learning.
Learning thing.
Yeah. Still learning.
Good. So I think about £10,000 worth will do it to set it up properly. Allow yourself a couple of hours to do each podcast all in, a couple of man hours perhaps if you've got two people involved, and you've got to do a bit of bullet point writing, come up with the idea, maybe organising guests and so on takes a bit longer. And then post anything from, I don't know if you could do it in half a day, probably a day minimum, a couple of days probably by the time you've properly edited it all down and put it out. And I think it probably takes us to the top end of that range, even though we're quite into the habit of it.
Yeah.
But don't let any of that put you off. This podcast was designed to encourage people to do it, right?
Yep.
Think they will?
If it's easy, it ain't worth doing. Well, maybe not all the time, but it's I think it's worth it. I think, but you got to be in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
So I think if you're thinking, well, we'll just give it a go, then you know there are ways of doing that. There are people that hire out podcast studios and go and give it a go. But if you think, well, actually, we want to get 100 episodes out of this, well, 10 grand's worth of kit is 100 quid an episode. Well, you know, what do you get from that? And it's one of those things that it's a slow burner. It does, but it does build and it does grow over time. And
so 21 was our first milestone. From number 1, we said we've got to get to 21.
Yeah.
What's the next milestone?
50, maybe?
50. Yeah, that sounds about right. Okay, let's have another reflective one. At 50.
We can't
wait.
Half a century.
Well, that's 7 months.
It's going to be,
So that'll be October. Yeah, so if you listen to no others, come back in October and see if we made it to 50. That's scary, isn't it? Good. Is that it? Have we covered all the key points?
I think so. Just give it a go.
Well, I hope that has inspired someone to give it a go. We've had a number of people, haven't we, asking us, how do you do it? Give us any tips.
Yeah.
There they were. They were our tips.
Top tips.
Yeah. So thanks a lot for listening. That's the SME Growth Podcast for our 21st episode, our milestone one. We're now in the top 1%. We can definitely say we've done 21.
I'm in the 1%.
Top 1% of podcasting worldwide. So thanks for that. And as I said in the talk earlier on, please do share it if you think that's been useful, however you might do that. We're looking forward to next week where we're going to do a bit of a best of the first 20, trying to pick up the highlights of all the various different subjects that we've talked about. And then we're coming up to our Shakespeare themed one in a couple of weeks' time, and maybe a guest as well coming in the next couple of weeks.
True.
So in the meantime, good luck with your business.